We made this.
Hello and welcome to Life's Milestones, the podcast right here on the We Made This podcast network, where we interview a different guest each time about birth and naming ceremonies, weddings and relationships and funerals and death. My name's Mark Adams and I am your host. I'm also a Humanist Celebrant. That means I'm trained and accredited by Humanists UK to write and present humanist ceremonies such as naming ceremonies, weddings and funerals. I do other stuff as well, renaming ceremonies, pet funerals and other such ceremonies to mark milestones in people's life. And that is what my podcast is about. My guest at this time is Wendy Andrew from the Scottish Pet Bereavement Counselling Service. And Wendy's another one of these guests that I've found through reaching out to people on social media, in Facebook groups and such things, to try and find guests to cover things I'm interested in covering in, rather than always just going to my mates. And I thought Wendy would be perfect, because we have talked about bereavement and funerals for pets on this podcast a fair few times before on previous episodes. So I thought Wendy would be brilliant and someone to bring an expert element to that discussion. So, what I'll do now is I'll pass you over to my interview with Wendy Andrew. With me at this time is Wendy Andrew. Hello, Wendy.
Hi, Mark. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, welcome to Life's Milestones. It's nice to have someone on that kind of touches on something that we've discussed on the podcast in the past. So we'll get into that later. First of all, it is a little bit of a personal question. How old are you?
I'm 45.
Right, okay, so you're one of these 40-somethings like me. Good.
Yes, I've lived a bit, but I've still got a bit to go yet, I hope.
This is how I feel, you know. You feel like you're actually vaguely something resembling wise, but you're still young to get on with it and use that wisdom. Yes,
but still young enough to be a bit silly sometimes.
Well, who wants a life where you're not silly? That's the best part. So, where are you from, and tell us a little bit about your background.
Well, I'm from Glasgow in Scotland, born and bred, and I used to live in Cape Cod in the USA as well when I was a student. And my background is actually dog walking, and I then became a pet bereavement counsellor from that.
Right. So, is it just a lifelong interest in animals that got you into that, or how did you get into that?
Yeah, well, my parents, when I was growing up, they were Labrador breeders, and we had a lovely house on the outskirts of Glasgow that was in quite a remote area, and we had a bit of land, and then we had a forest next door. So I grew up surrounded by animals. I kind of sound a little bit like I had a Snow White childhood, which I guess I kind of did. You know, there was always rabbits and deer and fox in the garden, and there was a farm next door as well. So there was always the cows and the sheep as well for company, which was quite nice. And yes, I've always loved animals, and I've been a vegetarian for 30 years. More because of, you know, my love of animals, that I don't really want to eat them. So yeah, having grown up around the Labradors, I've always had, you know, that sort of warmth with them. Although Pixie, my dog that I have, she's a Pomeranian Chihuahua, so we don't talk about Labradors in front of her.
So tell me about your business. It's called the Scottish Pet Bereavement Counselling Service, is that right?
Yes, it is. And as I say, that was born from my dog walking business. One of my client dogs very nearly had a fatal accident at home. She had swallowed some ibuprofen, and it was just one of those tragic things that could have happened to anyone. It was completely accidental, and we nearly lost her. And I had walked her since, well, before walkies days, she did puppy visits, when she was still a crazy little puppy, and very, very fond of this pup and her humans. And it was one of those horrible situations that when I got the message from her owners telling me what had happened, and I just thought, oh my goodness, what can I do? How can I help them? I was obviously being supportive, but I wanted to know that I was doing it in the right way. So I decided there and then I must do better. So I took a course with the ISCP, which is the International School for Canine Psychology and Behaviour, and I became a pet bereavement counsellor, mainly to support my own clients when the time comes. And I thought that's a really good thing to offer a cradle to grave service.
Yeah.
And I just basically thought, well, do you know what? I'm getting such good feedback about this. People are always saying, that's a really needed service because so many people don't have that support. And I thought, do you know what, you're right. So I decided to open the service up to everybody if they needed it, rather than just my clients. And yeah, the Scottish Pet Bereavement Counselling Service was born.
That's amazing. And we've talked a lot about pet funerals and grief when a pet dies on this podcast. And I actually put a little survey up on my Life's Milestones Twitter, basically saying, what's your opinion of pet funerals? And the options were, it's a really nice idea, it would help me, not for me, but I'm glad that they exist, and that's a silly idea, get over it. And I'm very happy that there was no responses, zero response for that's a silly idea, get over it. And I do feel like people are, because, anyone who's had a pet will understand the grief that they've had personally, that people aren't seeing the services that you provide or pet funerals that I could potentially provide as hokey anymore. But I think that's a relatively recent thing, don't you think?
Yes, absolutely, Mark. I am on a bit of a mission to combat what's called disenfranchised grief. And that's grief that's not acknowledged or accepted in society. And we spoke earlier about the sort of lack of support. And, I do find quite often that people require my service because they're not getting the support they need from their own peer group or even indeed their own family. And it is exactly those people saying, oh, it's just an animal, or, are you still not over this yet? And really, it takes as long as it takes. Everybody's entitled to their feelings. And I really do think that we're in an era where the spotlight is really on kindness and compassion. It may be just a cat or a dog or a goldfish or a bird or any species. It's grief for pet loss is not species specific. And I really do think it's important that people know that the support is there for them if they need it. And I think my service is so needed because there is a lack of support. There is disenfranchised grief, and it may be just an animal to one person, but that person's opinion doesn't really matter. It's about the grieving pet parent. So who cares if somebody else thinks it's a silly idea? It's about what the person who's lost their pet is feeling. That's the person whose feelings are important and matter. And they're the ones that need the support, regardless of what other people think. So I really want disenfranchised grief to be done away with. And I'm on a bit of a mission, as I said, to combat that and to let people know that their feelings are valid and that I'm there to support them. And I'll always be an advocate for them.
And I couldn't agree more on that. I mean, the thing is, you and I both can potentially provide different services for people who are grieving from pets. But I think what you're talking about, the disenfranchisement, it's only a pet, I think people are learning. I think people really are better than they were only 20, 10, maybe even 5 years ago when it comes to being kind to people that are grieving from pet loss.
Yes, I completely agree. And I think even just in the past year with everything that's been happening, people are having a bit of a wake-up call as to, I actually listened to another podcast, and it's done by Theo Rossi from Sons of Anarchy. And
Right.
he did a fantastic podcast with Kim Coates, who starred as Tig alongside him. And in the early days of lockdown, they mentioned the whole situation that we find ourselves in internationally. And Theo said something that really resonated with me, and it was this whole lockdown era gives us an opportunity for introspection. And he said, welcome to yourself.
Huh.
And I just thought, that's amazing, and we're all feeling that just now. So I think people are being a bit more introspective and thinking about how they are towards other people. And when Caroline Flack sadly took her own life earlier in the year, the internet and social media was covered with be kind.
Yeah.
And I don't want that to be a passing trend or a passing hashtag. I want that be kind and be compassionate to continue, and for people to keep on thinking about how other people are thinking or feeling and how their words and actions affect other people. And I think if people can get on board with that, then that is the kind of gateway to doing away with disenfranchised grief.
I think you're right, and I think society is moving towards a culture of it being okay to ask. If you don't understand something, if you can't understand someone's pain over a pet, it's okay to ask. And it's also okay not to understand as long as you are kind. Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons why I do what I do. And I don't know if it's too early to mention my book, but one of the reasons that I wrote the book was as a low-cost alternative to counselling, so that I could still help people during this time where interaction is very, very limited.
Brilliant stuff. Brilliant stuff. We'll cover this more when we talk about funerals a little bit later on in the podcast. But shall we get into the meat? Shall I ask you some really personal questions?
Well, not the meat. I'm a vegetarian, Mark.
Oh, me too. I know. I shouldn't have said that.
Get into the juicy bit.
There we go. The juicy carrot. I don't know. Okay, so we're going to move on to talk about birth. So when and where and how were you born?
Well, I was born in 1975 in Glasgow, and how I was born, just regularly in the hospital as nature intended.
So tell us a favourite story about your childhood.
Oh goodness, there's so many good stories. I mean, obviously I have like the happy memories of Christmas and holidays and things like that.
Labradors.
On Labradors, yes, they always feature heavily. But one of my favourite childhood memories was actually my father was a police officer, and both my parents worked. And there was one day my sister and I came home from school, and the two of us were absolutely ravenous. And my dad had been early shift, so he was at home when we came in. And he was out cutting the grass and whatnot. And, we said to him, "Oh, Dad, can we have a snack? Can we make some toast?" And he said, "No, you'll spoil your dinner and your mum will go crazy if you don't eat your dinner, blah, blah, blah." So we thought, right, okay, that's fine. So he went back out to the garden and carried on doing what he was doing. So my sister and I sneaked the toaster, the bread, the peanut butter, everything that we could possibly need up to her bedroom. So yes, you can see what kind of a family I come from. So we completely disobeyed my dad, but we had obviously inspired him in some way. So he basically finished what he was doing in the garden, came back in and thought, "Oh, do you know, I could really go a wee bit of toast and peanut butter." And he couldn't find anything, and he was like, "Where's the toaster? Where's the bread? Where's the peanut butter? Where's everything gone?" So he phoned my mum at her work and said, "Did you take the bread to work with you in the toaster?" And she was like, "Why on earth would you phone me up and ask me such a stupid question?" And he said, I can't find anything, it's all gone." And she said, "Where are the girls?" Then the penny just dropped. But the great thing about my dad was that, although being a police officer, you would expect him to be quite a disciplinarian, he so was not. He's completely the opposite of that. Because I think having seen so many awful things in his career, he basically thought, whatever my sister and I were doing was quite funny. So he had a really hard time disciplining us when he actually, thought it was quite amusing, and he had little crows at the side of his eyes, so you could always tell if he was serious or not. And he was like, you really shouldn't have done this, but then the wrinkles would show, and you're like, yeah, we're not in trouble for this at all.
It doesn't sound like he's a man who was very good at poker.
No, I wouldn't have thought so.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much for sharing that.
No
Do you
problem.
have children yourself?
I don't. No, I don't. Not at this point, but I'm open to it in the future, perhaps.
Right. So if you do have children, do you think you'll have a naming ceremony, a christening, or any other ceremony to welcome them into the world?
Well, at my age, it's highly unlikely that I would have my own children. So there is a possibility perhaps of adoption.
Right.
And so, again, there is a possibility that they would already have a name. But I mean, certainly if I did have my own children, then yeah, I dare say I would have a naming ceremony. I'm not a particularly religious person, but I think that is a nice thing to do to make, a bit of an occasion of that sort of thing.
I mean, you can actually adapt a naming ceremony to make it an adoption ceremony. I haven't had the pleasure of doing that, but I have had colleagues that have, and they're so lovely. Maybe if you do adopt, that could be something you'd consider as well.
Absolutely, and you would be the very first person I would call.
Well, that's very kind of you. There's some very good celebrants in Scotland, actually.
Yes, I do actually follow one from the Highlands on Facebook, and he's absolutely hilarious.
So if you had a naming ceremony for this child that you don't have yet, do you have any idea of what you might want to incorporate into that ceremony?
Well, obviously my dog Pixie would have to be part of the ceremony, but yeah, it's not something that I've ever given a huge amount of thought to. But yeah, I think it would just be a kind of a celebration if I was adopting, perhaps having obviously the family surname focusing quite on that, because it's welcome to this whole bunch of people, so I think there would be a strong focus on that.
Yeah, and animals in ceremonies are one of two things. They're either wonderful and memorable and it's lovely and adorable, or they're a nightmare. So that is a risk you would be running.
That's true. Pixie is one of those kind of dogs who tends to steal the limelight quite a lot, so it would probably be all about her, I'm sure.
Okay, so we're going to move on and talk a little bit about marriage. First question is, are you married?
No, I'm not married either, no.
No? So do you want to get married? Do you think you believe in marriage?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly do believe in marriage. I just haven't met the sort of potential husband as yet. I have dated extensively over the years, but never quite found the one.
Yeah, and there's a lot of folk on this podcast similar age to you and me that are in a similar position. I'm not married myself, in fact, and I think people still talk like there's a stigma about not being married at our age, and I'm like, fuck off. I work in this industry. There is no stigma anymore. You are wrong.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that I think if you meet somebody and you feel that they are enhancing your life in some way and that they're going to stick around and become a permanent fixture, then I think it's a lovely way to acknowledge that. I don't think it's necessary for everybody.
No.
But, as I say, I just sort of haven't found that person that I'm right for them at the same time that they're right for me.
Yeah.
Ever hopeful it might happen, but I don't think there's as strong a focus or a sort of necessity. I think maybe sort of in the past it has been a kind of societal expectation, and there's been obviously men are celebrated as being bachelors, whereas women get written off as old maids and spinsters.
That kind of thing drives me crazy.
Doesn't it just? But I think now women are kind of reclaiming the sort of bachelorette part. I'm quite happy to be single and to have my life quite smooth and uncomplicated by other people's dramas. So to be perfectly honest, I'm not particularly bothered one way or t'other whether I'm married or not, or if I meet somebody or not. My life is pretty good as it is. And if I met somebody that enhanced that, then that would be terrific. And if not, I've got no issue with that whatsoever.
I think that's the perfect way to think about it. And also in your case, I'm presuming that they would have to like dogs.
Oh, yes.
Cats was a prerequisite for me, so, you know.
I'm slightly allergic to cats. But, you know, as long as they are an animal lover, then that's fine with me. If they're not an animal lover, then I would question whether that's the right person for me.
So the cat allergic thing, this is nothing to do with the podcast. They're just, you like animals, I like animals. The cat allergic thing, right?
Yes.
It is possible to be allergic to cats, but not a specific cat that you've got used to. So my partner is horribly allergic to all the cats, apart from our cat. And he's fine with her.
Interesting. Oh.
It took him a while.
I can imagine. No, I've got friends who have cats, and I always have to take antihistamines before I go and visit.
When he used to come over, when we didn't live together, he used to come over and he just melts. And I was like, well, we're a 2-part deal. If you want me, you've got to have the cat.
Yes, you'll just need to get used to it.
So it is possible. So, you know, if you meet someone with a cat, you might want to, like, put in the legwork, maybe.
Only if they're worth it.
For real. So what would be involved in your perfect wedding, do you think?
Again, it's not something I've given a huge amount of thought to. I mean, I don't think I would want some huge elaborate ceremony with all the trimmings. I'm a bit more of a kind of low-key person. I would be just as happy getting married at home with, you know, a pizza delivery as I would with going away, you know, to a destination for a wedding, or, you know, just maybe something quite small and intimate. And yeah, I don't really know, to be honest. I would need to discuss that with my future husband.
Well, fair enough. So have you thought about what you would like as your first dance?
No.
No.
Maybe something quite upbeat. And I do quite like Strictly and all those sorts of things. So I think, you know, it would maybe be fun to perhaps engage the services of a dance professional and learn a proper dance, because quite often when you attend a wedding, you know, it's just two people shuffling around the floor and you just think, well, that's a bit sad.
Oh, the walk around slowly dance, I call it.
Yes, that's exactly it. And I just think that's it. You know, I don't mean that in a bad way, and I'm not bashing anybody, but, you know, I think for your first dance, I personally would prefer something a bit more of a show, you know, just to, you know, say, well, this is our first dance. This is something to remember and something to be talked about years later. Like, oh, I mean, I'm not expecting to do a Dirty Dancing Patrick Swayze lift in the middle of the floor or anything like that. I wouldn't want anybody putting their back out at this age. But
so no Argentine tango like on Strictly then?
No, not quite. Maybe something along those lines, but not quite as, you know, injury inducing.
A tango, not an Argentine one.
Yes. Maybe something a bit more, you know, I don't know, but something that you would remember and that you could say, oh, your first dance was so beautiful, rather than, oh, your first dance was disappointing.
That's amazing, yeah. I love stuff like that when people kind of adapt the kind of accepted norms and just make them that little bit quirkier but recognisable. I think that's brilliant.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we're going to move on to basically the reason why I invited you on the podcast. It's to talk about death, but obviously, in your case, to some extent, we're going to be looking more at pets and pet bereavement when it comes to death. But we'll go through all the normal questions. I am going to ask you about your own funeral as well. The first question is, are you scared of death?
No. I wouldn't say I'm scared of death. I'm more scared of the manner of which I arrive there, if you know what I mean. I don't want it to be sore. I would rather not be in pain. So, you know, I think something quick and painless would be quite acceptable, or something that I'm not aware of. But yeah, I wouldn't want to be scared or in pain or in distress at the time of my passing.
That makes a lot of sense. Have you ever experienced the death of a loved one?
Sadly, yes. My grandmother died when I was 8 years old, so it was quite a kind of early experience of death, and I was very close to her and absolutely adored her. Sadly, she was my only grandparent that I knew. The other three had passed before I was born.
Right.
So, she was my one and only granny, and she was a lovely lady, and it was very sad to lose her at such a young age. And obviously I've, sort of lost pets in the past as well. So I have learned how to deal with that over the years.
So what you've talked about having lost pets in the past, is that what inspired you to do what you do?
In a way, yes. I really related to my clients that I mentioned earlier, and I wanted to support them in the right way. And I kind of thought, well, I know how I felt in that moment, and I can imagine how they must be feeling. Obviously, everybody's experience of death and grief is different, and it affects people in different ways. So I would never presume to know how somebody is feeling. It's different for everybody. So I know how I felt at that time, and I know how upsetting it was for me and how I didn't know where to turn with it.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to educate myself so that I was of use to other people.
And I'm going to ask you a question that I'm sure you get from quite aggressive people. So I'm sure it's one that you've dealt with in the past. Do you feel that it's fair to compare the grief of losing a pet to having lost a family member?
Yes, I do.
So do I. If you could maybe explain a little.
I'd be only too happy to. I absolutely do feel that it is just as valid, because for some people, their companion animal is all that they've got. When you consider the human companion animal bond, it's incredibly strong, particularly with people who have an emotional support animal or a service animal. For a lot of people, their animal is the only companion that they have, and they don't have a lot of human interaction. So certainly for those people, it's absolutely valid. And even though I'm a pet bereavement professional, Pixie and I are a team of two, and I know that I will be absolutely distraught when she goes. And I just think that anybody who invalidates somebody else's feelings, it's very inconsiderate and very insensitive, because we all go through the same stages of grief.
Yeah.
That where, the model of the 5 stages of grief by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross would be denial, bargaining, anger, depression, and then acceptance. But with pet bereavement, you also have anticipatory grief a lot of the time. If your animal is elderly or unwell, you know that is an event that is going to come. So you have the anticipatory grief, and oftentimes with animals, there's guilt involved, and that can be, have I taken them to the vet too soon? Or have I, waited too long? Should I have prevented an accident in some way, shape or form? So there's all these feelings of grief, which are just as valid in pet loss as they are in human.
I think to some extent there's an element of fear of stigmatisation as well. You feel this bad, but you don't want people to know because they might look down on you. And that really, really sucks.
Yes, that harks back to the disenfranchised grief. And it's almost as if people feel obliged to suppress how they're feeling. So that's why I think that the counselling is so important, because it gives people a healthy outlet for their emotions, and to let them know that how they're feeling is okay, it is valid, it is normal, and that there's no judgment here.
And I know for me, when I lost my cats, not the current one, obviously, my first cat, she was horrid. Nobody liked my cat except me, but I was absolutely inconsolable, completely distraught, and there was nowhere for me to go. And the only way I could help myself was to get a new cat. There was nowhere else for me to go. And my current cat is the opposite. She is the most loving, adorable, soppy, floppy, dopey kitty that everybody loves. And I feel like people might give me more kindness because of the type of cat she is. And I don't feel like I'm going to be any more or any less sad when she goes.
Yeah, I mean, it's about respecting your feelings, whether your cat had a bit of a sassy attitude or not. You know,
that's an understatement.
Yeah.
She hit my mother.
Oh, maybe your mother deserved it. I'm joking.
Well, I think the cat thought that for sure.
Yes, cats make up their own minds about things, don't they? But you know, it's one of those things. It's your feelings at that time that's important, not other people's. And people should respect how you're feeling rather than whether the nature of the cat was appealing to them or not. That doesn't matter. They should be there to support you.
Yeah, I think you're right. So we're going to move on now, and we're going to talk about your funeral. Have you decided whether you want to be buried or cremated?
Well, I'm hoping it's not a decision I have to make for quite some time, Mark.
Well, me too. You seem like a nice lady.
Thank you very much. I'm not really keen on either burial or cremation, if I'm honest.
Okay.
But I did see a thing quite recently and I thought, oh, isn't that fantastic? And it was kind of like a pod, almost like a kind of egg-shaped thing. And you get buried in this and a tree grows. And basically, as you decompose, all your nutrients go to feed this tree. So you become part of a forest. And I thought that was a really beautiful idea.
That's fantastic. I don't think, or at least in England, I don't think that is currently legal. If you send me over the link, if you know what it is, what I'll do is I'll stick it on social media so people can have a look at it. But I think it's probably something that we would need to campaign for, because at least English laws, I'm not so sure about Scottish, but English laws are very, very strict about the disposal of bodies. So I'm fascinated by this. I think it's such a lovely idea.
Isn't it? If it's not legal, it should be.
I agree, but I think we need to investigate this further. But do you remember where you saw this article?
It was on Facebook,
Right.
and it was quite some time, but I'll have a dig around it because I definitely thought that was something that I would like because, you know, it's one of those things when you're in the business of death, you do kind of think about it sometimes. And
Yeah.
as honourable as sky burials are, you know, the Tibetan sky burials, I know that that's not legal here for sure. But again, you kind of have the idea of giving back to nature.
It's kind of part of the inspiration for this idea of the podcast was that when I was trained, we all had to come up with a poem and the music that we would want for our own funeral. And ever since then, I feel like encouraging other people to help their families should be part of my mission, really.
Yeah, it's a subject that we don't spend enough time thinking about and we hope will never happen, but it's one of the only things in life that is inevitable. So I think probably it's a good thing, obviously, that you're doing this podcast, but I think it is something that we do need to spend more time on.
That being said, have you thought about a reading that you would like at your funeral?
No, I actually haven't. I'm embarrassed to say.
You're not the first person. That is the question that people struggle the most with on this podcast. Funnily enough, the one about, are you scared of death? Everyone's got an answer. But that's the one that no one's got an answer for.
Yeah, I think I maybe just haven't found it yet. So maybe I should do a bit more reading and see if there's something that jumps out at me. So as I do read quite a lot, so I'll certainly look out for something and mark that for future.
Okay, so what about the music tracks that you would select for your entrance, reflection and the exit for your funeral?
I'm not too sure, you know, sort of what order, but I certainly do like Dock of the Bay by Otis Redding. That's quite a nice, peaceful song, and, you know, it kind of gives this sort of element of reflection in that. where you would just be, sort of sitting, looking out to sea, contemplating. So I definitely think that would be a song I would like to have in there somewhere.
Any other thoughts on what you might have as well, or is it just the one so far that you definitely got down?
Just the one so far that I've definitely got my heart set on.
I mean, in theory, you can have what you like at your funeral. You can have the same song played 3 times.
Well, that's true. But, the music I listen to isn't really conducive to funeral settings. I don't think anybody would really want to hear Snoop Dogg at a funeral, would they?
It's your funeral. If you want Snoop Dogg at your funeral, you can have Snoop Dogg.
That's very true. That's a very valid point.
What was that other song? There was Walk the Dinosaur is another ridiculous animal one. Who Let the Dogs Out? What else could we have?
Oh, goodness, there's so many with animals featuring. But, I suppose that although animals are a big part of my life, they're not the sum total of it.
Mm.
They are constant companions, and it's quite often the case, sometimes when I say to people, what would you associate with me? Because I was actually doing a radio show a while ago and I was asked to pick some songs.
Right.
And I thought it would be a fun thing to do, to open it up to my friends in Facebook and say, what song reminds you of me? And the amount of people who are acquaintances, who are lovely people, because I obviously only have nice people that I like on my Facebook. But I basically, kind of thought this is quite telling about the people who know me, as opposed to the people that know me as Wendy, the dog walker, or Wendy, the pet bereavement counsellor.
Right.
Because there was so many people that had dog-themed songs that they suggested, whereas what I was really looking for was what song would make you think of me as a person. So it was quite an interesting social experiment. And, people that I've known from school or, socially from quite a young age, they picked songs that were playing in the background when we were having a great time or making memories, or songs from holidays or that kind of thing, So, it's maybe something that I could throw out as a poll when I get nearer that time.
That's such a good idea. Get everyone involved in your funeral with you. That's... Yeah, a Facebook consultation on what you could play at your funeral. What a good idea that is.
Absolutely. And I actually have a funny story about that from one of my aunts. And she was a real chatterbox. And I think she and my mum, they were in the same class at school. And they were notorious for talking, the two of them. And she was terminally ill and she passed away a number of years ago. And the vicar at her funeral, basically, he had the place in an absolute uproar. It was hilarious. It was one of the best funerals I've ever been to. And my Aunt Vivian, she had picked a song by Take That, I think it was, and it was Nothing to Say at All. Right. And he just said, "Are you kidding me?" And we all were absolutely cracked up at this because she was so chatty and lively, and you just thought, I don't think she's ever been stuck for words in her life.
Brilliant. Wendy, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on Life's Milestones. I want you to tell everybody about your business and your book. This is your opportunity to plug yourself and let everyone know what you can provide for them.
Oh, how very un-British. Thank you very much. Well, yes, I'm Wendy Andrew and I'm the founder of the Scottish Pet Bereavement Counselling Service. And you'll find me on Facebook at the Scottish Pet Bereavement Counselling Service. The website is www.thescottishpetbereavementcounselingservice.com. I'm also on Twitter and Instagram as _SPBCS, and I'm also on LinkedIn, and I'm offering corporate packages as well, because I would like to encourage employers to be a bit more compassionate to their employees and incorporate some HR policies that include pet bereavement leave. So I'm happy to consult on that or offer a package of counselling sessions to employees. So yes, over on the Facebook page, there's always a lot of up-to-date news. That's where I've got my sort of biggest following. I've got quite a lovely community over there that I've built up over the last wee while. So that's where most of the updates happen. So yes, it's been an absolute pleasure to be on your podcast today, Mark, and I really thank you for helping me to help other people by getting the word out there that the pet bereavement industry exists. There's a lot of us around. I'm actually part of a network. So yes, do have a look at the social media pages. I'm happy to work with anybody anywhere. Obviously at this time, everything's online. I'm not doing face-to-face consultations. So if anybody wants to work with me, that's great. But if you'd prefer to work with somebody more local, then, I have contacts in England, in Australia, in America. There's a lot of us around, actually.
Brilliant.
It's unfortunate that nobody really knows that we're here. So I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to let people know that we're here. And my book, How to Recover from Pet Loss, Supporting You on Your Journey to Acceptance, is available on Amazon as either an ebook or a paperback. And I wanted to do a paperback version because I think it's a nice, thoughtful gift. If you know somebody that has suffered pet bereavement, and if you maybe don't know what to say, it's a very thoughtful way of being supportive and saying, I'm so sorry for your loss. I don't know what to say or how to help you, but here's a book that might be of use to you. And we cover all the stages of grief in the book, as well as healthy coping mechanisms and how to support your children and how to support other people. So it's quite a concise book, but got a lot of useful information in there.
Well, Wendy, I think you're brilliant and I think you're doing incredible work.
Right back at you.
Thank you so much for being on Life's Milestones.
Thank you.
I'd just like to say one more time, thank you so much to Wendy for joining me on Life's Milestones and telling me her stories. And it was a pleasure to have her on. What a wonderful woman doing wonderful work. I immediately fell in love with what Wendy is doing. And I have read her book now. It's called How to Recover from Pet Loss, Supporting You on Your Journey to Acceptance by Wendy Andrew. And you can find that on Amazon for £5 if you want a paper copy, or under £1 if you want to get it for your Kindle. And it's really, really lovely little read for if you have lost a pet and you're feeling sad. And Wendy has been kind enough to put me in touch with more local pet bereavement counsellors that I'm hoping to work with in future. So perhaps Manchester will be getting more pet funerals by me once COVID is more under control and we can get back to our normal lives. I've got a few more interviews with folk that I've approached through social media groups on Facebook lined up for the next couple of episodes, but then I will be returning to friends in future, I think. I've really enjoyed doing them so far, and I'm very much looking forward to the really interesting guests that I've got coming up. But if you are a person of faith, if you're a Christian or a Sikh or a Muslim listening to this and you would like to come on my show, please do get in touch. All the information you need is on the closing theme of the podcast. So thank you one more time for joining me for Life's Milestones, and I'll see you in a fortnight. Life's Milestones is a podcast on the We Made This podcast network. The show's host is me, Mark Adams. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at MarkAdamsHC. You can also find me on Facebook. Just search for Mark Adams Humanist Celebrant. My website is humanist.org.uk/Mark Adams. Regular listeners to the podcast can claim a 10% discount on my fees for a naming ceremony or wedding. Just make sure you quote Milestones when you get in touch. The theme tune for Life's Milestones is performed by Zach Reagan, and the logo was created by Carl Bryan. Follow the show on Twitter at Life's Milestones. Thank you for listening.
elsewhere on We Made This. We are Starfleet.
Honestly, it felt so great to see the Starship Discovery again.
Yeah, out of the frying pan and into the fire.
Right into the fire. So in our previous episode, I had commented on how I felt like all the dramatic tension that the writers built up with Burnham falling kind of felt like, all right. But here, I felt the exact opposite. It just seemed like the right blend of tension and risk and what's at stake.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head, and I think there's a couple of reasons for this. One, I think
The giddy carousel of pop.
So there's one particular thing where I think Sylvia just nails the Mannix, absolutely nails them, and nails them to this day. And she says, the Mannix mission is a simple one. They want to make music exciting, glamorous and interesting again. Make people wake up out of the boredom and meaninglessness of 20th century life and jump up and down to some good old rock and roll music and think about things and have a laugh, because at the end of the day, none of us will ever be happy. And I had to have everything about them immediately.
The Movie Palace.
Before we even think about the book, I suppose, were you coming to this as a Marilyn Monroe fan, particularly?
No, not at all. In fact, I'll admit, it's very awful, but I knew almost nothing about Marilyn Monroe. I knew of her. She's a cultural icon.
Yeah.
I would say she's even gone beyond that now, and she's almost a symbol. So I knew of her. I had seen a few movies that she'd been in, although, to be honest, whenever I watched those movies, I wasn't really focusing on her because she was sort of in the background.
Check out all of these shows and more on the We Made This podcast network.